Hey guys, what's up? It's me, Thomas. Today we're back here with the VC Andrews Critica. Today we got the top 10 episodes of the 80s Twilight Zone reboot. So I never really actually watched the Twilight Zone. I don't know, never really found time to watch it, so... I only know about Twilight Zone because there was like this accident in the movie where, well, plane crash went wrong, killed the 3 actors, if I remember correctly. Yeah, that or the stunt doubles, I don't know. One of the two, hard to say. But enough about that. How about we just hop on in and get to it, huh? Be sure to like, subscribe for more. Hope you enjoy. Let's go. Hello?
You're traveling to another dimension. A dimension not only of comedic reviews and editorials, but also of nostalgia critic-like inspiration. A universe where the boundaries of torturing murder reactions with the flyaway song from Hilda are pushed further and further, as are the ways he comedically gets back at me for it. There's a signpost up ahead, and your next stop, the VC Andrews Critiquer. Hey guys, happy Halloween from VC. Hope you're doing well. Yeah, I freaking love Rod Serling's classic, The Twilight Zone.
This classic supernatural phenomenon from the 60s left one of the biggest impacts on television, inspiring many other classics like Goosebumps and the Treehouse of Horror segments on The Simpsons, though attempts to directly light fire twice with this series have not exactly set ablaze. Not those in the 2000s anyway. The 80s was another story. The film adaptation released in 1983 has become a cult classic in its own right, but today we'll be looking at the 80s TV reboot, which is not only very good, and not only has some episodes that were on par with the original, but it even did some of the same concepts as the original, and in my opinion, did it even better. That almost sounds sacrilegious, but I mean that 100%. And I figured, since the original series has already been talked to death on YouTube, and so few other people have talked about this series, I thought I'd shed some light on it and list my top 10 favorite episodes from this underrated continuation of Serling's classic series. Now, please keep in mind 2 things. 1, the quality of most of these episodes is average at best. Sorry, but they were the best versions online that I could find. And second, I'm going to spoil the twist ending of each episode because... it's the frickin' Twilight Zone, the series that practically revolutionized the concept of plot twists. So, let's get started. These are the top 10 episodes of the 80s Twilight Zone reboots.
Start it up!
Number 10.
First up, I guess we're doing with the devil.
Eye of Newton. This is one of those 7 to 10 minute episodes I mentioned, so this one's going to be a bit shorter. The premise is also pretty simplistic. A professor called Sam can't solve a complex math formula, and in frustration says he'd sell his soul for the solution. So a demon appears and says, done. Of course Sam says he wasn't being serious, but the demon says all sales are final, or in the words of early seasons Bart Simpson,
you're damned if you do and damned if you don't.
But that's not fair.
Of course it's not fair.
I'm the devil.
We're evil. Look it up.
But like most soul-selling agreements, there is an exit clause. You can ask him any 3 questions or assign any 3 tasks to him, and should he fail to answer or complete it, the contract's void. Yes, this premise is as cliched as it sounds,
so basically,
but what makes it enjoyable is Ron Glass is the demon. Every minute of his sleazy beatnik persona is just a joy to watch.
You mention Dante to most people these days, and they ask you how you liked Gremlins. You got class. He uses the souls to animate the bodies of undead maintenance workers.
Really?
First question. Yes, really.
No, I didn't mean to...
Sam. We've been over this before. Evil, remember?
I also love how the text on his shirt keeps changing, and every phrase is something you totally expect a demon to say. Sherman Heasley also shines as the professor. You have to admit, he's pretty ballsy the way he talks to a being of hell, and the twist in this episode is decent. So since he blew his first question, Sam asks if there are any limitations to his abilities, to which the demon says no, he can do anything or find his way back from anywhere. So for question 3, Sam opts for a request.
Get lost. No.
Not the best twist of the Twilight Zone, or even on this list, but that is still pretty damn clever. No pun intended. Plus, how awesome is it to see a demon of Lucifer get figuratively burned when they literally burn thousands of souls every day? That's really all I got for this one, but it shows that with quick wits, and of course the power of God, Not even Lucifer's army can defeat you. Next one.
You gotta give him credit. That was pretty fast.
Number 9.
No limitations. And get lost.
Examination Day. Another shorter episode, but again, it gets across quite a bit in that short time. Dickie Jordan, a kid from the future, has just turned 12 years old, and while he's psyched about it, his parents, not so much. See, in this future, every kid who reaches the age of 12 is required to take a government-mandated intelligence examination, and if your intellect is not at an acceptable level, yeah, this is a dystopian future. And while he's confident in his abilities, his parents don't appear to have much faith. So again, I can kind of see why they chose to have this be a 7 to 10 minute episode. It would have required a lot of unnecessary filler if it went the full length. Hell, some parts of this episode feel padded out as is. Nonetheless, there is such a great atmosphere in this episode, not just with the tension, but also the visuals. The dystopian future city looks really damn cool for 1985 television, obviously taking inspiration from other dystopian future films like Metropolis, and this definitely looks like a bleak crapsack world. The outfits and building interiors also had to have been inspired by the 1980 adaptation of Brave New World, well, with the identical Star Trek-like outfits, the cheap and silicone but charming and surreal sci-fi sets, and that eerie 80s sci-fi music. Way to pay homage to probably the most famous dystopian future story ever. Well, after that one, obviously. Yeah. But more importantly, there's the tension. Throughout the episode, Dickie seems fully confident in his abilities, and his parents constantly tell him he doesn't have to worry about doing well on it. But it's clear by their reactions that they don't think their son has a chance of seeing the 22nd century, and try to subtly drop the hint to him that he should enjoy the time he has left.
Did I say something?
Oh, no, honey, not at all. It's just that you didn't have to use up your birthday wish on that. You'll do fine on the exam. You shouldn't even be thinking about it.
Oh my gosh, an omnicoder! Wait a minute, I thought you said I had to be 14.
The government changed its regulations last month. We were hoping that you hadn't heard about it yet. Why don't you watch TV until bedtime?
I'd rather read. There's nothing good on TV tonight.
Yeah, the fact that Dickie can't even pick up on these not-so-subtle hints is not a good start. Another strength of this episode is that Dickie's a pretty likable kid. He has a plucky innocence to him that makes him really endearing, and the fact that he isn't the slightest bit worried about acing this test is just so admirable. Granted, I don't think he knows the stakes yet, but even so, most kids almost piss themselves while taking a college entrance exam. This kid doesn't even bat an eye. Wish I had his courage at his age. So eventually Dickie's turn comes, and his mom doesn't go with him for some reason. And his pop says he's allowed to stay in the building during the examination after he drops him off, and once again says, don't worry about a thing. Yeah, we kind of get the message now, episode. He should be worried as hell. You don't need to keep hammering that in every 5 seconds. But the examiners seem nice enough, even if they do give him a truth serum to make sure he answers truthfully.
That's insulting. It says they don't trust us.
By the way, if you don't remember that Harry Potter clip, it's from a deleted scene. And the examination begins easily enough.
Complete this sequence of numbers. 1, 4, 7, 10.
Well, any boob would know that's 13. Wait, I just realized that's the unlucky number. Oh boy. So yeah, the parents are waiting in dread while it's raining outside. Yeah, they're not so subtly setting up that he's going to bomb this test horribly. And sure enough...
We regret to inform you.
Gas.
Your son's intelligence quotient has exceeded the government standard.
Wait, exceed...
According to Rule 84, Section 5 of the Code. You may specify now whether you wish his body insured by the government, or would you prefer a private burial?
No, this is... Jeez, and I thought the dystopian future government in the Hunger Games was cruel. But damn it, that is such an ingenious twist. So his parents constantly telling him to not worry about doing well wasn't just to hammer into the audience the severity of the situation. The parents were trying to discourage him from putting his all into it. That is such a brilliant way to throw us off. And all those other hints, like the parents mentioning they were hoping their son wasn't smart enough to know about the recent law change, or suggesting he watch mindless television instead of reading books to expand his brain. Just, wow. And yes, the ending is heartbreaking. It's probably one of the saddest Twilight Zone endings ever. But by coming with a twist that probably would have shocked even Rod Serling, Dickie Jordan has definitely left a legacy with said death.
Poor George. Man.
Number 8.
The fact that it had to be exceeded, not under it. Yikes.
Profile in silver. This episode's premise may be super cliched, but it's one of the best executions of that cliche I've seen. The episode opens with what seems to be a Harvard professor in the 60s named Dr. Joseph Fitzgerald, who actually turns out to be a Doctor Who-like time traveler from 2172, sent to get actual footage of Lee Harvey Oswald assassinating Kennedy, who happens to be his ancestor whom he really looks up to. But Fitzgerald freaks when he sees Oswald about to draw fire, and in panic has his ancestor duck in cover just before the bullet hits him, thus saving his life. Joseph is now naturally a national hero, and even JFK is now his fanboy. But of course, disrupting the past has now led to nuclear war, and his Zordon voice automatic wristwatch confirms that if Kennedy isn't assassinated like history planned, at worst the war will destroy the Earth very quickly, and at best it won't happen for a few more decades. So yeah, we've seen this premise dozens of times in media before. Set something right in the past, only for it to set the future wrong, and the only way to fix it is to be time squat and set the future back to failure again. But this honestly is one of the best portrayals of this premise I've seen in media, thanks largely to the incredible bond between Kennedy and Fitzgerald. It's clear the professor has a strong admiration for the dude, no matter how much he tries to insist this mission was solely professional. And when Oswald was about to blow Kennedy's brains out, you really feel his panic and instincts to protect his family and hero. On top of that, Kennedy's pretty well portrayed here as well. Not only does the actor look a lot like the real McCoy, but he's just so damn likable. He's not only very kind and laid back, but can also be firm and authoritative if the situation calls for it. And the chemistry these two develop just feels so strong and believable.
So what's the twist?
According to the press, if you had been a relative, there might have been a place for you in my cabinet.
You like fencing with the press, don't you?
You take your fun where you can. God knows there's little enough in the job itself.
So this really puts a lot of strain on him, knowing that he'll have to have Kennedy sent back to be shot again. Speaking of which, you may wonder how Kennedy surviving led to nuclear war. Well, apparently, this led to the current governor of Russia, Nikita Khrushchev, who was one of Russia's less power-mad rulers for non-history buffs, being assassinated instead, and the new corrupt leader of Russia holding American troops in West Berlin as hostages in order to drive American forces out of Germany. But how did Kennedy's survival lead to Khrushchev's assassination?
How?
They honestly never reveal, and I can kinda see why. I bet the producers were afraid that suggesting Kennedy would have done something stupid or unethical had he survived the shooting would have sparked a huge controversy. Family Guy may have gone away with implying Bush losing the 2004 election due to 9/11 not happening would lead to nuclear war, but Kennedy's another story. He was probably the most admired president in history after Lincoln, so slinging mud would probably have not gone over so well. And now for the ending. So Joseph tells Kennedy the truth about his identity, showing him some future tech to prove it, and Kennedy is willing to go back and be shot as history called for, since it's the only way to stop the nuclear holocaust from happening. I mean, after all, a potential sole survivor may not have a spare set of glasses for reading. So Joseph sends him through time to the future.
You took an oath, didn't you, to protect the president's life? Well, you and I still have work to do. We're going back.
Yep, using his future tech, Joseph poses as Kennedy and takes the bullet for him, while Kennedy assumes his professor job in the future. Now that is a way to put a spin on an overused cliche. Don't want a beloved historical figure to be assassinated even if history demands it? Take their place in said assassination. Plus, it really shows the love Joseph has for his family. Not even with the threat of the apocalypse would he let Kennedy be shot, instead found a selfless way around it. There's even a nice piece of wisdom Fitzgerald's future mentor gives to Kennedy's Paul Giamatti lookalike bodyguard, who's the only one who remembers the events of the alternate timeline.
No one can change history. Even the act of traveling in time is a part of history. Dr. Fitzgerald's actions were simply a part of what was.
So this episode shows that, like American legends themselves, cliches can never grow old if they really have that much appeal. And thankfully, this episode gives it that.
Okay, I gotta give it credit. Like, the fact that the time traveler was like, no, I can't do it. I'll take your place. You go future, you take my place. Basically a body swap. Or at least a position swap in this case. Which I gotta say, that is interesting to say the least. Though, I'm not sure, like, how to feel like, okay, so let's say Kennedy, I'm not sure when Kennedy came to the future, but you gotta ask, like, what the heck? I don't know. Maybe they could have said, like, it was a secret society that said, okay, Kennedy didn't do anything, we'll go after Khrushchev. Then we can start the nuclear war. Which honestly, if they went with that, I could definitely buy. I don't know. Because I guess they figured, well, they tried with the president, but as history shows, we're still here. No nuclear wasteland. Yet. I don't know. Maybe if they went with a secret society kind of deal, I'm not too sure that would have worked, but could explain it. Anyway, next.
Number 7. Button.
Who's got the button?
We all love to play Would You Do Something If It Leads to This But Also Leads to That games as kids. Well, this episode, based on a short story by Richard Matheson, turns that game into an actual reality with an interesting outcome. Arthur and Nora Lewis are a young, miserable third-poor couple
I know there was a movie
who
about
didn't even graduate 8th grade.
There's no, like,
and
box.
what's worse, the love seems to have gone from their relationship before it even came. But then one day, they receive a mysterious unsolicited package with no return address that just seems to contain a box with a locked button. Their reaction is pretty much, meh. But that night, when Arthur is working a night shift, the Cinder visits Nora and gives her the key to the button along with the 411 of the situation. If she pushes that button, she'll get $200 grand tax-free, but someone who she doesn't know will die. And the rest of the episode is the two loveless lovebirds wondering, to push or not to push? That is the question. In the process, pushing each other's buttons more and more. So at first glance, turning a concept that's mostly a game kids play during recess might sound a little corny, and honestly it kind of is, but that's why it's so fun to watch. Yeah, for the most part, this episode plays more on the comedic side, but it's one of the better comedic Twilight Zone episodes, especially thanks to the two leads. The way these two work off each other while hamily debating whether to push the button or not is just a sheer joy to watch.
Well, we won't push it.
Oh, come on. Thousands of people die every day all over the world, Arthur.
Norma! What do you think?
I don't know what I think. It's such an
So, 200,000 in the 1980s.
Oh, come on!
Isn't that in the millions, I think?
On top of that, both actors really shine as their respective characters. Mira Winningham is really believable as a miserable, sulky young biatch who hates her life and smokes, drinks, and snorts cocaine regularly. Well, they never actually confirm she does drugs, but it's clear just by looking at her that she's a total junkie. I also love how she looks like if young Lorraine McFly had the same bad smoking and drinking habits as her middle-aged self did in the original 1985 before Marty went back in time and made the future better. And Brad Davis is really good as the typical weak-willed but more optimistic husband stereotype. So naturally, Nora's more open to the idea while Arthur is more hesitant. And I especially love this argument they make while debating.
I mean, what if it was some old Chinese peasant or something? Or someone with cancer?
What if it's somebody's newborn baby?
Instead of using an example like a serial killer or someone who's miserable and wants to die anyway, they instead imply that she's racist and uncaring towards cancer patients, further cementing what a trash bag she is. But despite the corny premise, the episode does manage to be relatively serious and intense in the second half. The scenes are still corny and funny, but also take on a more edgy tone as the decision is driving Nora more and more crazy.
It just doesn't seem fair. You know, telling us we could have all that money.
Wait, did the guy give him like
Make us think about it.
Why don't you push it?
And sure enough, she does. So what's the ending? Well, it's kind of funny. I did some research and found that the original short story by Richard Matheson had the ending I was certain this episode would have, namely where the husband is the one who dies because she never truly knew him. This episode's ending is much less predictable. After they push the button, nothing happens and it seems like they were gypped. But sure enough, the guy who gave them the box comes the next day with the promised $200,000 and assures them that someone they don't know has died. Only there was one small thing he forgot to mention. They only allow one push of the button per person and they're taking it back to give to someone else.
I can assure you it will be offered to someone whom you don't know.
Uh-oh.
No disrespect to Matheson, but that's a much more effective ending in my book. I mean, come on, I'm sure most of you expected the husband dying to be the ending as well, but on top of that, it wouldn't have been sufficient karma because I mean, again, when did these two know each other? This is a better punishment, as she now has to live with paranoia for the rest of her life that someone at any time could make the same selfish decision as her and push the button, thus ending her life. But then again, they never specify it'll be her. But what if it is? Or isn't? See, the more ambiguous ending is much freakier, isn't it? I may not have seen the second adaptation of this story with Cameron Diaz, but after seeing this episode, it's clear that that movie has a pretty tough act to follow.
Yeah, they kind of go more into like...
Number 6.
Trying to stop the killing, but anyway. Next.
Dead Run. If you're a fan of the original series like I am, there's a decent chance you've heard of the episode A Nice Place to Visit, which many fans think was the inspiration for the twist ending of The Good Place Season 1, both of which involve selfish characters winding up in heaven, which isn't all it's cracked up to be, only to learn that's because...
This is the other place.
This is the bad place.
My point for bringing this up is, if you're also a fan of The Good Place like I am, you may remember, and big spoiler coming up for those who don't, so beware, that the characters learn that no one's made it into heaven, or the good place, for over 521 years, because the judgment system is so strict, you're penalized if your good actions have unexpected consequences, like harming the environment or financially aiding a bad person. Anyway, I once again think Michael Schur might have taken some inspiration for that concept from the Twilight Zone as well, specifically this episode. Probably not as much as the other example, but... well, let's look. Johnny Davis is the world's worst truck driver, causing more driving incidents in a day than every drunk driver in America does in a year. And yes, I did reuse that joke from my Worst Witch review. That is until his pal Pete sets him up with a job, delivering the souls of the damned to the bowels of hell. Yeah, cause that's how Satan operates. Just imagine how the LinkedIn post for that job would look. Truck driver wanted. Responsibilities include ferrying the souls of the wicked and righteous to suffer in fiery torment and agony for all eternity. But benefits include your soul being protected from going to this horrible place yourself. And that last part wasn't a joke, that really is a perk with the job. But you know, that's kind of what makes this episode so memorable. Just this bizarre premise of someone actually getting a job delivering people to hell is pretty nuts, even for the Twilight Zone, and there's some nutty imagery to go with it. Like, I love how Purgatory looks like a concentration camp, and the trucks they use to transport souls to hell definitely have a final solution feel to them. I also love how they make the demon guards look like the dystopian future police officers we often see in dystopian future movies. I'm surprised we didn't see any of those in Examination Day. And even if hell just kind of seems like a low-budget Alcatraz, the people there definitely seem like they're suffering regularly. And of course, there's the pleas of the damned begging Johnny to save them from their fate.
Please, mister, you gotta help me. You can do it, mister. You can do it when they ain't even looking. You're our last chance, mister.
But of course he can't do anything cause, I mean, they're dead, so it's too late for them to repent. Only catch is, some of these offenses seem pretty petty, like letting your kids run around unsupervised, being dirty in public. No, I mean dirty as in messy. Or just wondering if maybe there's not a God after all. One of them explains that since God is now apparently too busy to determine who deserves eternal life and eternal damnation. Yeah, cause again, that's totally how heaven works. But again, all that's fine because it's necessary to the plot. He's now leaving it in the hands of certain angels. Anyway, the angel who has been newly appointed to determine the fate of the condemned is an ultra-conservative, by-the-books, focus on the family-like politician who's decided that the judging's been too lenient and he's going to be running a much tighter ship.
Sinners, John. The murderers, the muggers, the hustlers, the pornographers, atheists, heathens, and so-called humanists.
You mean anyone who doesn't measure up to your standards?
Not my standards, John. The only standards that matter. Age-old and violet standards that God-fearing people have observed for centuries.
One thing to note is, this was an obvious satire of a movement at the time called the Moral Majority, where politicians were pushing for ultra-conservative family values, like no working women, gay marriage, and converting the Jews. Anyway, the guy he's speaking to down in hell reveals he's spreading the word, so hopefully it will reach the big man, and he'll step in with how strict the judgment's been. Cause yeah, again, it's not like the Lord is omniscient or anything and knows everything and is everywhere. Yeah, I know it's just a story, but as a Christian myself, I have to tell you, this is not how the afterlife works. But anyway, the Gatekeeper Angel inspires Johnny, so
the
while
Power
on his
Rangers
ship,
HQ back
he
there.
sets free a guy who avoided being drafted because he didn't want to kill anybody, an old-school librarian who fought for controversial books to stay in the library because of their artistic value, a young gay man, obviously a shout-out to the constantly mistranslated parts of Leviticus conservatives use to harm the LGBTQ community, and a drug addict who died of an overdose. Maybe that last one should... Well, anyway, he lets them go and shows them the road to heaven, because again, Johnny's relying on scripture.
I remember this story back in Sunday school about how between the crucifixion and the resurrection, Christ spent some time in hell, rescuing the righteous, the ones that didn't belong. I guess you could say I'm just following an old tradition, here in hell.
Maybe call it. Thank you.
Again, as ludicrous as this premise is, it's also really fun and reminds us that even if God is very strict and expects us to be good moral people who love our neighbors as ourselves, he is not a ruthless dystopian perfectionist tyrant like many conservatives think he is, and knows who's truly good and evil.
Yeah, I guess we just gotta remember that sometimes.
Number 5.
Oh, we got End of the World coming up.
A Small Talent for War. This is another one of those 7-minute episodes, so this round's going to be a bit shorter, but even with the short runtime, it has, in my opinion, one of the best Twilight Zone twist endings ever, not just of the 80s reboot, but of the Twilight Zone in general. So the episode starts out very similarly to the classic Twilight Zone episode, To Serve Man.
It's a cookbook.
It's a cookbook.
Yep, that one. Namely, aliens have come to Earth and all the world's leaders have gathered at the United Nations to find out why. And unlike To Serve Man, the aliens don't even try to hide their intents to destroy humankind. They basically say that Earth has failed to live up to their standards because humankind is barbaric and crude with that small talent for war they possess. And so, doomsday is coming tomorrow for them. The world's leaders plead to give them 24 hours to plead their case, and being a reasonable guy, he agrees. So before we get to the great twist, let's talk about a few other things that make this episode shine. I really love John Glover as the alien ambassador, even if he does just look like a glowing member of the USS Enterprise as opposed to an actual alien. He more than makes up for this with his delightfully smug and condescending personality.
Surely that's not fair.
The universe, Mr. Fraser, is not fair. Do you think we made this decision in haste? We've been debating it for many centuries.
Centuries?
Oh, yes. We are a very long-lived and patient people, but even our patience has limits.
Compare him to, say, the Canamites. Now let me clarify, To Serve Man was a great Twilight Zone episode overall. It was engaging, suspenseful, and had one of the most iconic Twilight Zone twists ever. But the aliens themselves, while they looked pretty cool, were pretty bland and stoic in personality when you really think about it. Even those artificial voices they used sound more like 1990s text-to-speech bots as opposed to advanced human artificial voice generators. Even the ones we've started using recently sound better. Even if there's nothing alien-like about Glover at all except his glowing appearance, he glows just as much with his performance. What about the United Nations reps? The only ones who really have a chance to shine and show personality in this short time are the reps of the USA and Soviet Union. The US one does really well as the one who tries to be level-headed despite the fate of the world lying in his hands, and the one from Russia is good as the cynical deadbeat who wants proof of everything.
I am not convinced. Before we enter into peace negotiation, I must have proof that this threat is real. Proof.
Halley's Comet. It's gone.
And before you ask, no, I won't make any Russia-Ukraine conflict references here, because like I said in the Animaniacs review, we shouldn't cast blame on an entire country just because their leader is pure evil. But enough beating around the bush, let's get to the meat in all this. So the alien ambassador returns, and thankfully, all the world's leaders have put together an elaborate treaty for world peace with each other, and evidence to support their goodwill and how they're not barbaric savages with a small talent for war. And all is safe.
I fear you have misunderstood me. On the thousands of planets under our control, we breed warriors, gentlemen. Warriors to fight for us across the galaxy. You fight erratically and clumsily. Your weapons are shockingly crude. And worst of all, in your hearts, you long for peace.
Son of a bitch.
Thank you, Carmen.
What else can you say to that? And sure, it's super depressing, but it's also super ingenious. They took a relatively common cliche and twist and reversed what the aliens usually expect. Instead of the threat of death for being too violent, it's because they're not violent enough. I have to say, I did not see that coming at all, not even with his criticism of their small talent for war, and I'm pretty sure most of you didn't either. And topped off with an alien invasion with CGI that actually looks pretty impressive for 1986 television. This is a very short, but very well done episode indeed. Plus, even if we do have a small talent for war, the alien ambassador did have to admit that we do have a huge talent for making people laugh with our stupidity.
As one of your fine Earth actors, Edmund Gwynn, once said, dying is easy. Comedy is hard.
Wow.
Number 4.
Interesting twist. Next.
The Shadow Man.
If you relax, it will enable me to do
No,
Anything
not
that,
that
please.
Shadow Man. Before I say
Definitely.
why I love this episode, tell me what this premise sounds like it's out of. It's about Danny Kaye, a lovable 13-year-old nerd who has the hots for the hottest girl in school, but of course she's only into the school bully, whose prank monster costumes honestly look scarier than the actual villain of this episode, and his only friend Eric is not always the most encouraging. Oh yeah, and he's so scared of the dark, he has to sleep with all his lights and the TV on. But
Damn,
tonight
really?
his mom decides he needs to nut up. Though I think the real reason was because her husband couldn't nut in bed with her with all that loud noise distracting them. Boo!
I think I would have just
deserve
said
that,
something about
but
the electric bill,
unfortunately,
but
she
okay.
picked the worst possible night for this, as right after this episode makes us think it's an Exorcist homage, we see a terrifying shadow being emerge from under Danny's bed.
Shadow Man.
and I will never harm the person under whose bed I live.
But he does seem perfectly willing to harm Danny's enemies, and Danny figures if the Shadow Man is never going to harm him, he'll exploit this by being the only kid in town who can venture out at night without a scratch. It works, but the newfound popularity starts to go to his head, and Eric isn't too pleased he's letting kids get hurt just so he can be popular. So yeah, what does this premise sound like to you? Okay, yes, I see some parallels to that movie too, but doesn't this episode just feel so much like something out of Goosebumps? The dorky protagonist nobody likes, the deadbeat naggy parents who are no help to the kid or their monster problems, the best friend who tries to be a moral compass to the protagonist only to be completely ignored, the one-dimensional sadistic bully who's the primary motivator to the protagonist's actions, and the villain who's shit your pants scary but still family friendly. Yeah, the Shadow Man just injures the kids he attacks, he never actually kills any of them. Well, one thing at a time. Yeah, it has all the most common story tropes associated with the Goosebumps work. I know R.L. Stine took a lot of inspiration from the Twilight Zone, but I swear, this episode had to have been his biggest inspiration for the style of Goosebumps works. But inspiration for the master of kids horror R.L. Stine aside, this episode is pretty well made as is. Yes, the characters are all cliches, but the actors and writing do a really great job at making said cliches feel fresh. Danny's pretty delightfully adorkable, and I personally can really relate to him. Yeah, I was also a bit more afraid of the dark than I should have been when I was his age. Wasn't proud of it, but yeah, I was pretty chicken. But he also believably transitions into the narcissistic asshole pretty well in the short runtime.
I've got them eating out of the palm of my hand. I've got Leanna.
Yeah, but what about the town?
Not my responsibility. If you excuse me, I got new friends. I can't keep waiting.
And as for the other characters, like the moral compass friend, the bullies, the blonde bitch, the unfeeling parents, all the actors do really well at making these one-dimensional cliches shine with their performances. And the Shadow Man, well, for the record, this episode was directed by Joe Dante, who also directed the Twilight Zone movie's remake of It's a Good Life, and yeah, that shit your pants mood really transitions here pretty well. From a screechy demon-like voice, Freddy Krueger-like appearance, and the fact that we never actually see any of his attacks or victims on screen and they're completely left to our imagination for how gruesome they were, this is definitely one of the Twilight Zone's darkest villains. And now for the ending. The school bully, who ironically looks a lot like Dustin Henderson, but I love Stranger Things, so kudos. Anyway, he's jealous that Danny's stolen his babe and wants payback. So Danny challenges him to a showdown in the park that night, where the Shadow Man is usually seen, and the bully stupidly accepts. And sure enough, the Shadow Man is there and scares the bully off good and hard. But it turns out there was one small thing the Shadow Man forgot to mention to Danny.
I am a shadow man from under someone else's bed.
Yep.
Son of a bitch.
I hate to reuse the same movie clip twice, but again, what else can
another
you say
son of
to
a-
that? By the way, director Joe Dante did confirm that Danny was killed, not just injured by the Shadow Man, so for being a great homage to Freddy Krueger and a prototype to the classic series by R.L. Stine that we all know and love. By the way, the Disney Plus series is pretty good so far. I recommend checking it out. This is definitely an
Check 'em out,
episode
Pat.
that, despite its title, definitely cannot be overshadowed. Boo! It was the least lame pun closing I could think of. Get over it.
Yeah, it could have been worse, as I said. Well, goes to show ya. Live long enough to become the villain and, well, we'll get your comeuppance. Which, as you say, can happen. Whoops. Anywho, moving on. Number 3.
Number 3.
Huh.
A
Sound
Little
like-
Peace and Quiet. What's really interesting
this
about
the
this
world
episode is
was,
that it
like,
takes a premise
gone-
from the original series and does it, in my opinion, vastly better. How so? Let's find out. It's about a wife and mom named Penny, played by Ralphie's mom in A Christmas Story, whose life is a living hell since her 4 kids, one of which is Anne-Marie from All Dogs Go to Heaven, won't stop being obnoxious, loudmouth little you-know-whats for 3 seconds, and her husband, aka Carly and Spencer Shay's grandfather, is a
Grandpa?
sexist entitled nagger. So while gardening to escape the
Noise! Oof.
she discovers a beautiful clock-shaped necklace buried in the ground and naturally decides to keep it. And then, when she's reached her breaking point with her loud family, she tells them to... And they do, as does the rest of the universe, freezing time and place. She quickly deduces that this is because of her new necklace, and after finding that she can freeze and unfreeze time just by commanding it to do so as long as she's wearing the necklace, she embraces her newfound power like mad. So the episode that originally did this premise was called A Kind of Stopwatch, which, while not a bad episode, was definitely not the most creative on Serling's part. For one, the main character McNulty was just an obnoxious, egotistical hothead, which has what to do with wanting to freeze time exactly? This episode's
Power?
better in that it gives the protagonist an actual reason to want the ability. In the first few minutes of exposition, we see that Penny has damn good reason to want this power with the kind of life she lives. Hell, I bet she almost wishes she was deaf. Another improvement is how
Honestly,
the gift is used. McNulty
ouch,
mostly
my
used
head.
it to control his enemies, but Penny uses it for a lot more than just that, such as beating this rude Karen to the last box of kids' cereal. I also love how she puts another cereal box in her hands while time is frozen, so she won't notice the box vanish into thin air before her very eyes when time unfreezes. Avoiding a long line at the grocery store, don't worry, she still pays for the groceries, and driving off annoying nuclear war protection activists.
Let's skip this one.
And okay, so this episode's not perfect. The part where Penny's first discovering and testing her new ability drags on way too long and is filler in every sense of the word. Plus, there are a few times when frozen people move on screen, but these really aren't big issues in the long run. But now for what
To be
people
fair,
probably
that's
remember
easier.
most about this episode, the ending. So A Kind of Stopwatch had a pretty basic and predictable ending where McNulty tries using the watch to rob a bank, only to drop and break the watch while time's still frozen, leaving him trapped in a frozen, timeless world forever. The ending of this episode is similar, but adds a lot more layers to this general concept. Just when Penny's feeling on top of the world, we learn that Russia has just launched nuclear missiles into the United States, and judging by the radio announcer's reaction, there doesn't seem to be any hope for their survival.
This is the end. There's not much. We have a verification. Soviet missiles have entered U.S. airspace.
Remember, Cold War era.
Alright, I know you're all waiting for me to make the reference, so I will. So because there's no Iron Giant to fly into the sky and have the missile blast into him to save the day... Psych! Yeah, sorry guys, but I still stand by what I said earlier. It's not fair to cast blame on an entire country just because their leader is pure evil. So as I was
Again,
saying, with
earlier.
no Iron Giants, Penny does the only thing she can do. Freeze time, and just in time too, as the missile was just about to hit her city, so this presents a very difficult dilemma. She can either unfreeze time again and be blown to bits by the missile along with the rest of her town, or she can let time remain frozen and spend the rest of her life in a frozen, timeless, dead silent world with no other conscious beings. This seems like a much more clever and thought-provoking ending than just freezing time forever while misusing said ability. But wait, Couldn't she have just moved everyone in the city out of the missile's way one by one beforehand and then unfreeze time once they were all in safe distance? Okay, so the episode does have more than a few flaws when you really think about it, but on the whole, this episode is much more clever and thought-provoking with its premise of freezing time than the one in the original series. Wait, couldn't she have also found a way to move the missile itself? Like, knock it out? Next one!
Yeah, stop before you get a headache.
Number 2.
Okay, guessing a Visa card.
The card. A lot of people think either the Shadow Man or Examination Day are the Twilight Zone reboot's scariest episodes. And those are indeed some real bone chillers, but I personally think this is the reboot's scariest episode. Oh. And what's really impressive is, it manages to be so without any deaths or even monsters. Well, no literal ones anyway. How is this possible? Let's find out. It's about Linda Wolf, a very loving wife and mother, but also has such atrocious credit that no credit card company will touch her with a 39.5-foot pole. That is except for a new invitation-only company called The Card, which is kind of a second chance organization for people who can't get credit anywhere else like Linda.
Huh. Credit card of last resort.
Their only condition with this is, you only have a week deadline to submit payments rather than 30 days like most companies, and they have some pretty severe late penalties, mostly in the form of repossession of items as collateral on the missed payments. That is all detailed in their cardholders agreement, which of course Linda signs without reading a single word of it. I mean, what's the worst they could possibly repossess if she's late? Can't possibly be anything that's not easily replaceable. So Linda buys herself some expensive perfume with her new card, and forgets to remit payment before the week deadline. But then she notices that their cat Boris is missing, along with his plush bed, food dish, and really all evidence that he even existed. And even stranger, no one else in the family seems to remember they even had a cat. But Linda figures they're just trolling her and that she deserves a new fridge, which she also fails to remit payment for. But then their beloved family dog Scooby also disappears with all traces of existence, and once again, her husband and sons have no clue who Scooby is and are now starting to question her sanity. And she's starting to think that this may not be a prank they're pulling on her after all. And then, when she uses her card for expensive car maintenance while her account's still overdrawn and delinquents...
Who's PJ? Including this moron driving the tow...
Their baby.
Who's PJ?
Oh
Brian,
no.
Who's PJ? Oh no!
Yep.
My baby!
Yep. Kid's gone.
I tell you, it's amazing. I saw the scene coming 100 miles away, yet it still managed to be effing terrifying. So yeah, in addition to being disturbing as hell, this episode provides a great satire on how risky buying on credit is. Maybe not as much as in this episode, but credit card companies can be pretty cold with what they take from you as collateral, and it really shows that you should never sign a contract or click the terms of service on your phone without fully reading it. But what really makes this episode effective is the characters. Even in just 22 minutes, all the actors do a great job at coming off as really complex and engaging. Linda may have horrendous credit and isn't always the brightest with decisions regarding herself, but she absolutely adores her sons and is the most wonderful and caring mother to them they could imagine, if the only one. And Susan Blackley totally nails the stress and agony most mothers would have if their children vanished from existence and no one else remembered them. And while her pets' disappearances naturally don't hurt her anywhere near as much as her kids, she is still pretty upset about it. I mean, pets are family too, and it sure doesn't feel good to lose them either. By the way, don't worry, the company didn't erase the kids from existence. No, that wouldn't make them money. They just repossessed them so they could sell them into slavery as collateral for the missed payments. And they also erased their memories of Linda as their mother. The husband, Brian, is also a pretty engaging character too. He and Linda start off having a really awesome relationship, but the more and more his memories are erased, the more and more we see that relationship slowly begin to deteriorate. Since again, from his perspective, his wife is growing more and more delusional, and the stress of this is really getting to him.
We don't have any children. We never had any children. We don't have a cat. We don't have a dog. Look, Linda, honey, I can't do this all by myself.
I can't. I have to call somebody.
And even though her screen time is somewhat limited, I really love the villainous Catherine Foley. She comes off like this nice, understanding lady who wants to be a second chance organization for credit rejects like Linda, but it soon becomes clear that she's a sleazy, heartless corporate bitch who wants to take advantage of being people's only credit option by giving them ridiculously short deadlines for payments. And it's even heavily implied that she actually enjoys tearing families apart if the cardholder can't submit payments.
You can't just take someone's children.
We can take anything we like, Mrs. Wolf, as long as you fail to make the minimum payment.
By the way, I just love her excuse for why they erase the memories of the loved ones from everyone else. Namely that it wouldn't be fair to give someone a cat, dog, or child without the accompanying memories. Yeah, that is bullshit. You just don't want the police getting a bunch of reports on missing pets and children and potentially tracing them to you. The only thing about this episode I'm not totally sure about is the ending. So Linda writes a check from she and Brian's joint account to buy her children back from the disbursement division, but Catherine warns her if the check doesn't clear, another penalty's headed her way. And it turns out that since it was from their joint account, the bank called Brian to authorize it and...
What did you do? What did you do with the bank? I canceled the check. No!
And true to her word, Foley takes everything Linda has left, including Brian, and as usual, all traces of his existence. Linda in fury cuts the card in two, and then her entire house vanishes along with herself, leaving only a nameless severed credit card. I know that downer endings are nothing new for the Twilight Zone, not even in this reboot, but usually the sad endings at least have a twist or clever commentary. This episode's ending has neither, but it's just so freaking bleak. Linda did not deserve this if there was nothing artistically significant about it for us. But other than that, this episode presents one of the most engaging, suspenseful, and scary Twilight Zone stories ever, and is Tommy stick solely with debit cards. And the number one Deer Fox of the 80s Don't Let Your Love Fly Away reboot is Teletubbies. Okay, I know the title said wordplay, I didn't have a stroke. I just wanted to give you guys an idea for what you were in for and call back to one of the funniest moments on my show. So as you may have guessed, the premise is this dude named Bill Lorre, who already has enough on his plate right now, well, with him trying to learn all the complex new terms for the company's products and the fact that his son's sick as a dog. Anyway, he wakes up one morning and finds everyone around him using words in a different way than what they usually mean.
That's quite a few for a small dog like an encyclopedia. But Ginger came through like a gem.
Don't let it get you down, Billy boy. It may take us a little longer to learn it, but we got the one thing only time can give you. Mayonnaise.
Yes, may I speak to Doug Seaver, please?
My wife's waiting for me. Today's our 17th wedding throw rug, and I'm taking her out for a sail and then to dinner.
She's gonna be here in 5 minutes, and I can't think of any place that'd take her for Dinosaur.
But of course he knows they're just trolling him and...
He's so pale and awfully congested, and he didn't touch his dinosaur when I took it into him.
What?
What?
Hold on,
Nah, he realizes something may be a bit effed up, and by the time he returns to work from his dinosaur break, he finds almost every word in the English language has changed meaning, and he can't understand a damn thing anyone's saying anymore, or vice versa. Oh yeah, and right when his son's fever has reached dangerously high levels and he needs hospital treatment. Uh-oh. So yeah, this episode's premise alone was just sheer gold. I mean, seriously, words somehow changing meaning overnight for everyone except one person? Is that original and creative or what? Again, shame on you, Sterling, for not thinking of that yourself. And before you ask, no, it's never revealed what the cause of this is, but considering the word changes also happen in print form, it's probably the same supernatural phenomenon that caused everyone but one guy to forget the Beatles. And yes, it is a bit silly, but who says a thriller series can't have a bit of humor now and then? Plus, just listen to how many bizarre phrases we get from it.
Dill popular Ben Ringo Day climb Titan only cattle spark western pottery.
What?
Yankee home. Hinge well in the iris.
Big torch to zoom this carload whistle. Use Metro Panther call, Blade.
Churchill in dipping but carriage, huh?
I think the one I wonder the meaning of the most is big torch to zoom this carload whistle. Plus, when the English language changes completely, he at least gets a pretty cool new name, Hinge Thunder. Sounds like a Mission Impossible character.
It does,
Others were not so lucky though, like their son's new pediatrician becomes Dr. Bumper, or rather, Letter Bumper, which eventually becomes the new word for doctor, while his son Donnie becomes... Tiny. My condolences, kiddo. But this episode is just as creepy and intense as it is funny.
Yay.
As you probably guessed, it's a brilliant satire on the issues with language barriers and aphasia, aka when you forget what words mean. And I think anyone will tell you those are indeed very stressful issues, but also very relatable. If you've been to a hospital, there's a very strong chance you've seen someone there who speaks little to no English, or the primary language of that country for that matter, trying to get help for themselves or their sick kid and no one being able to understand them. Or how about the loss of understanding of words? Those who have relatives who have developed Alzheimer's, especially grandparents, we know how scary that can be. And I think that's what makes it the best episode. Kind of like the card episode, it's about issues that are relatable and painful to many. It also helps that this episode was directed by Elm Street director and creator Wes Craven, so he was really able to milk the creepiness of this premise for all it's got.
Yeah,
From
honestly,
Bill
if I was
realizing
him,
the word
I'd
changes
probably
on
be
a
freaking
prank,
out too.
to finding the words now in print form, to when Donnie gets pneumonia and he and his wife have to get him to the hospital without being able to understand each other, to them crying over the potential death of their child, and more. Yeah, Craven really knows how to make a scene creepy, intense, but also captivating as possible. But I think the best example of this is when the doctors are tending to Donnie. It would be very hard to deliver these gibberish lines with the seriousness of someone trying to save a child from death, but thanks to the talented acting and Craven's directing, I felt like this was something out of Grey's Anatomy or The Good Doctor.
Ain't got a slim packages.
Voting Tart Rod Capital. Wine Mental Aid Van Cattle Renting Jupiter.
Alpha Conference?
Slot Lebate Renting.
Seriously, how many people can say things
I
like
don't even
Wine
know.
Mental Egg Van Cattle Renting
wonder how many-
Jupiter or Uncle Confidence without so much as a smile? Yeah, it's so impressive that the actors were able to deliver these lines as
I wonder how
dramatically
many takes
as
they had to
it's
do,
called
because
for.
frankly,
Plus, unlike the
laughing.
majority of Twilight Zone episodes, this one does have a happy ending.
Oh?
Well, happy-ish. Yes,
So-
Donnie is saved, thankfully, or Guide Quest top new pipe, as the doctor says, and we get this really epic line from Bill.
Thank you, Lord. Thank you very much for my boy. I hope you can understand me.
Sorry if this sounds a bit preachy, but I love how this episode reminds us how God is always with you no matter what, even when every single
a lot
word
of
in the English
Christian-
language changes meaning. And Bill starts to teach himself the new language, and he seems like he's off to a good start with learning it. One last thing I want to mention is, this was apparently an unsolicited script, but the Reboot's producers loved it so much, it landed the writer Rockne O'Bannon a staff writer's job on the show. I think that fact alone backs up why this is the Reboot's best episode, with a premise that was fun and original, but also emotional and relatable, and under the direction of horror master Wes Craven, it made for, in my opinion, the Reboot's best Deer Fox ever. And that's all I got for the 80s Twilight Zone Deer Fox. Now if y'all will emancipate me, I'm off to have some chicken pencils for my dinosaur today. Happy hairbrush!
If you were on the
Okay. Yeah, buddy, you might want to check your English dictionary. I think he's affected. I'm not going to do it, don't worry, I'm not. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed that one. So, I'll see you guys for the next one. Till then, laters.